Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah? So as a prelude to what I'm about to say, for those of you who know me, I'm disabled in two ways today. One is that I can't stand up, and the second is that I can't use my hands. And there is a third one, which is I'm going to read rather than talk in an ad-lib way. There's 3 points when I'm going to move into poetry, and so you'll just get a transition between my story and the poems, or extracts of poems illustrate a bit of what I'm trying to say. In perfect time, she opens up, invites us in to see and share the pain she's held alone for years. Her silence deep, her life weighed down, made grey within. For being simply true to all she is, freed fears that took control. Shame's shadow stole this precious soul from life. A love denied, unseen, unknown, until provoked by truth demanding more, she minds her call. In the few months leading up to my 25th birthday in July 1986, I found myself at a threshold. I recall writing in my journal that if this is what my life was always going to feel like, I didn't want it. I had a very simple choice. I could either end my life to stop the all-consuming, ever-present pain and anguish I felt, or I could choose to stop pretending to be what I was not. I decided on the second option, reasoning that if that didn't work, well, then I could always revert to option one. I thought that if I stopped hiding what I was so ashamed about and accepted who and what I was, it might mean that no one else in the world would ever like me. But at least there might be one who did. Me. I guess you might be wondering what I was hiding, and I will come to that. And you might also notice that I'm still here, 33 years on. During 1989 to 90, whilst journeying through the Sahara Desert into Mali and then Niger, I read about the Dogon people. They have a saying that a mask is the sign of a dead soul. That phrase found its way to me at a very difficult time. It was a gift reminding me of the pact with life I had made 3 years before, to let go of pretense, to be wholly and truly who I am, no matter what others might do to me or say about me. That phrase continues to guide me, inviting me to show up every day, and it has helped me to be here today, willing and able to share with you, even though part of me feels terrified. So what happened to me that led to my choice in 1986 to lay down my mask of pretense as an alternative to ending my life? Now, the facts of my childhood may seem completely insignificant by comparison to the atrocities that many of you in this room have experienced. What I have discovered over the years is that terrible and not so terrible things happen to us all. But what defines us in this world and what shapes the lives we make is not what is what we do with what happened. This is one thread of the storyline that is mine. I was born in 1961, Lusaka, Zambia, and I lived there until just before my 12th birthday in 1973. My early childhood was a life of material privilege, a white British colonial kid, surrounded by others like me at school and in our social realms. I had grandparents whom I loved and an extended family close by. I had 2 parents and a brother whom I idolized and resented in equal measure. I had friends, including one very special friend whom I'd grown up with, Lynn. She and I were like sisters and were inseparable. And I was a pale-skinned, plump little girl, full of freckles, who was frequently teased for being fat, with a brother who was only 15 months older, but he was blonde, blue-eyed, tanned easily, athletic, and had all sorts of opportunities I was denied. Now, in 1964, Zambia gained its independence. From this point on, my familial and social landscape began to change, though at the time, as a 3-year-old, I knew nothing of the wider context and how it was impacting the adult world around me. My aunt and her family left around 1965, followed soon after by my beloved grandparents. The little girl that was me faced a simple reality. Those people I loved went away and didn't come back. This trend of people leaving culminated in around 1969, with my mother taking my brother to boarding school in Scotland. 2 months after she went away, my father went to London on business and left me with another family for a month. At the age I was, I didn't understand the practical reasons behind this. All I knew was that my whole family left me behind. And many years later, I unearthed the deep terror that settled within me, that they too, like the rest of my family, would never come back. In reality, my parents did return to Zambia, to me. But over the next 3 years, friends continued to leave, including my best friend, Lynn. I was devastated. She left and never came back, just like all my other schoolmates. My original peer group disappeared, and I became increasingly lonely, finding myself at school with Zambian students who were much, much older than me, and surrounded by a predominantly adult world amongst my parents' friends. Although as a white kid, I was still part of the privileged minority. For me at school, the tables were turned. I was younger than everyone else. I was the only white girl in a class of young black people. I was teased in languages I didn't understand. I was laughed at, and sometimes when playing on my bicycle in the street where I lived, small groups of Zambian teenagers would throw stones at me, so I stopped going out. I was the European kid living in Africa who no longer belonged. Though I did not realize this until years later, I was noticing what was happening, trying to make sense of it all. And many years on, I discovered that that period between 3 to 8 or 9 years old are key to a child's development, their sense of themselves in relation to others, their agency and influence in the world around them. A deep-seated core belief took root in me and began running my life. I believed that people left because of me, because I was all wrong. Of course, none of this was conscious. I was simply trying to understand why they kept leaving. And because I was believing it was because of me, that meant I had to do something to stop them going away, so that I wouldn't keep feeling the pain of losing them. I had to be a good girl, not an all wrong girl. And this was the period when I started packing myself and my feelings away, when I started pretending. So in 1973, we moved to the UK, and my initial excitement, imagining that I would be reunited with all my family and everyone who had left, turned to deep distress and an even deeper loneliness that lasted for years. The reality was that none of my family and none of my friends were where we went to live. So I started senior school partway through the first year, when everyone else had forged their friendships. On the face of it, I was a European girl amongst other European girls in a predominantly middle-class, selective school. Yet because of my differences, I found myself once again the outsider, a minority amongst the majority without the privileges of before. I was the strange girl from Africa who behaved differently, who had a funny accent, which I very quickly changed to the one I have now. In my first 3 years at the school, I was left out of games in the playground, was never invited to birthday parties. I was bullied and ridiculed for the way I spoke, the clothes I wore, the satchel bag I used for carrying my school books in. And my first name back then was Leslie. And there was a girl at school who used to taunt me with a phrase I didn't understand. She used to call me Leslie the Leslie. My mother never did explain to me what it meant. So from being the European kid who no longer belonged in Zambia, I had become the African kid who didn't belong in the UK. After several years, things settled a bit at school, and by the time I reached the 5th form, I had a few friends. But actually, my main solace and sense of being okay in the world was through a few special teachers who recognized my loneliness and isolation, and who were there for me when my parents were not. So my belief that I was all wrong played out over and over again through my life. In 1980, I headed off to university, and all the pain of being an outsider got reactivated big time. I desperately wanted to fit in, to belong, but I found it so difficult to relate to people. I couldn't face the pain of feeling so lonely again, so I tagged on with a group of girls trying to be one of them. Now, they weren't bad people, they didn't do drugs, they didn't smoke, but they did go out and would drink way too much and then overeat. After less than 6 months of being around them, I put on a stone of weight. I felt so disgusted with myself and took a self-destructive turn when in January 1981, I started making myself sick. Even though I didn't want to do what they were doing, I really, really wanted to be a part of the in crowd. So I did what they did and then would feel overwhelming shame and disgust. And I would find myself sitting at a toilet threshold. Her vacant gaze turns to face the abyss of the bowl of oblivion. Dazed, sick from guts to core, this retching misfit swaps pain for shame. Swallowing toxic myths, she defines the deal that steals the gift of feeling life. Instead, numbs ancient griefs and hides self-loathing, forging gorging rifts that break the strain, brief moments of relief when what's inside pours out. The purge vacates the gaping void, devoid. Again, she stuffs and chokes on bellyfuls of lies and hates herself the more for wanting more. I had become my own persecutor. Amazingly, at the same time I fell into bulimia, I started writing a journal. This private time with myself, learning to face what I was doing, tracking what led me to make the choices I made, increasingly daring to let myself feel and express what was going on within me, eventually helped me turn my life around and leave behind those long, lonely years. It took 17 years from beginning to end to free myself from its grip. So this sets the scene for my choice point in 1986. Choose life over living a lie. Of course, it was not quite that simple. In those first 5 years of my bulimia, leading up to my pact to no longer pretend, I was struggling with facing the likelihood that I might be different in an altogether more scary way, that I might be a lesbian. The very great surprise to me was that in my first relationship with a woman, I simply knew I had come home to myself. It was as if everything about me suddenly made sense. I cannot explain the depth of relief and ease that washed over me. For the first time ever in my life, I experienced a deep, unconditional self-acceptance. Finally, I knew who and what I was, and there was no turning back from this undeniable dimension of me. Accepting my sexuality set me free. It mattered not one bit when Margaret Thatcher introduced a law in the UK in 1988, making it illegal to talk about homosexuality in the education system. Pretending had brought me to the brink of killing myself. I was on my way back to life, and I was not willing to return to the darkness of that place for anyone. This law was finally repealed in 2003. But there are still 62 countries out of 195 in the world who would have me or male homosexuals as criminals. Now, to be clear, my life was not resolved overnight. I went through years of struggling to free myself from the grip of bulimia, because the seeds of the belief that I was all wrong were so deeply rooted in my psyche. I became acutely attuned to what people did and said, and if I had any sense they were going off me, I would leave first. I would go. Of course, since that time, people have left me. Friends and lovers have come and gone. My parents are dead, and I am alive and thriving, knowing how much they loved me and all they did for me. I am proud of what I did to reconnect and heal my relationship with them after years of blaming them for the misery and keeping my distance from them. I am proud of what I have done to come through it all. But sometimes the remnants of my old anguish sweep in like a cold mist, reminding me of what I and my life used to be like. As I have prepared to share these aspects of my life with you, those mists have been lingering on the edges of my days these last 2 weeks. They have helped me touch into the pain, recalling my loneliness and fears, reminding me I am no longer that lost, lonely little girl. I accessed an inner truth that is undeniable and unshakable. And even though I sense that that little girl that was me is lingering at the edge of this circle, urging me to run away from you before you get a chance to reject me, I can tell her we will be okay. No matter what you do or say, we will be okay. And I tell her I can handle this because I know I am a child of this world, born of the divine, no better and no worse than any other person in this room, in this place, on this planet. In perfect time, she opens wide, steps out for all to see and share her joy, unleashed by ancient truths once sealed from friends. Esprit de corps, like birds that soar on wings that trust the thrust from upward coils, faith proves that for her too, this life and friends have gifts to share beyond her ken. She cannot know what will unfold, but if she holds that love trumps all, she'll dare to dare. She's out in perfect time.